All right, we're recording. We're starting the video, and we're going to screen share. Oh, it's too close. Let me see something here. Yeah. Okay, a little bit better. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's 5:30. Don't know if anyone will be joining me on this call or not. It's still kind of the just coming back from Christmas break. It's good to be on here. I do hope that everyone enjoyed their short time off. You had a week off to spend with family and friends, and enjoy your Christmas holidays. So I do hope that it was a good one for you. I can assure you that I had a nice time with my family, very peaceful and very relaxing time that we had here. And I do hope, I know many of you are in the Midwest, and I'm thinking of Lori up there in cold area that she's in, and I think North Dakota, somewhere around there. And I know that we're getting blasted with cold air all across the country. So you're in my prayers. I don't say that lightly because it can be life threatening. So for what it's worth, do keep your self safe. My in-laws and my sister, even struggling up in Ohio and northern Kentucky, my father-in-law texted several times today. They've been pretty much snowed in for, I guess, 5 or 6 days. He finally had to get out and get some supplies, and he got out and did his errands and got back safely. I'm quite sure that it was nice to get out after being sort of trapped inside for 5 days. So do keep yourself safe. Okay, we got, let me see here, who's on here with me? Oh, Ken, Lori, right? Hey, Lori. How are you? Can you hear me, Lori? I hear you, I think. Can you hear me? Looks like you can hear me. Yep. Okay, well, I don't know, Lori, if you can hear me or not. Maybe your microphone or your speaker's not turned up. Let me, if we, see you typing. Okay. Okay, go out and come back, and I'm gonna just, okay, we'll try that again. Okay. Or I could hear you, or hear some of the, I think, the background. And so I'll give you a second to come back on since there's no one else on here before I go ahead and start. Well, you may be having trouble with the internet connection there, Lori. I'm going to go ahead. Yeah, this is a week that we're moving on, and I hope you're enjoying reflecting on your life as from the past and reflections as it relates to. Okay, there you are. Let's see. Maybe you hear me now, Lori. Can you hear me now, Lori? Maybe not. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead anyway. Lori, maybe you'll come in and out. Maybe it's the connection. I don't know. But I was just saying before you logged on, Lori, that I hope that everyone in the class, you of course included, um, are enjoying how you're reflecting on your life in the past and seeing kind of how all of these developmental theories and, in fact, ideas that we go through in human development are actually applied to you in your life, as well as, and oftentimes people have brought up their children. And right now we have this rather new phenomenon that we're discussing this week, which is the sandwich generation. And that is what we now call people who are still, people say middle-aged people, anywhere from, say, 35, I guess, on the young end, around that age, up to 60 or 65. Are you back in there, Lori?
I am. Tried a different computer.
Okay, yeah, I see. All right, good. I'm glad you're on. Good to have you. And I'm of all things most happy that you haven't frozen to death.
It's close.
Yeah, I bet.
Coats.
Yeah, I was mentioning earlier. I'm probably as far south as anybody. I'm in southern Florida, and it's very cold for me. Of course, my blood has thinned out over the years, so tonight's going to be a very cold night, one of the coldest nights we've had in years, I guess. It might get down in the 30s here in Palm Beach County where I'm at. Probably not where I'm at. Palm Beach County is a big county. I'm on the east side, and it doesn't get as cold east in Florida, at least. We're closer to the coast. But out west in Palm Beach County, it might get down in the mid 30s, which is just too much for us to handle. I know you laugh at and laugh at us.
Well, right now, I came home from work and I was thinking, oh man, it's so nice outside. The sun is shining. It's 7 degrees.
Oh my.
It's beautiful. Yeah. I wear my coat out to the car.
Yeah. Well, it's nice that the sun's shining though. That's actually very good.
It is. Yeah. That helps with everything.
Yeah, I was mentioning my, of course, a lot of my family live up north. I have my wife's parents live in southern Ohio. My sister's in northern Kentucky, and my father-in-law was out today running some errands. They've been sort of shut in for about 5 days. He couldn't get out with the snow that they've had. They've had a lot of snow, and finally he was able or forced to get out today. So in a sense, it was good to get out and not get cabin fever. But he's back home safe and sound now, thank goodness. So praying for that. So I was just actually mentioning the sandwich generation, which I don't know if you had a chance to see my reply to your post. You really have taken it to the next level there. I think that might be, something for the textbooks. I might write a chapter just about your situation. You're taking care of grandparents, parents, children, and grandchildren, or at least to some extent there.
Oh, absolutely. It's fun.
Yeah, and yeah, you got the right attitude about it. I was going to mention to the class, you may not get a chance to read my reply to you, that this is a rather new term that we've come up with in the past couple of decades, maybe, if that long, that we have this thing for anyone as young as 35, I guess, on the low end, around that age, to maybe up to 60 or 65, really, where we're caring for our parents and also caring for our children. And the reason is, and we've talked about this in the class before, we have our regular human development, but then we also have societal influences and impacts on our development as well. And in this case, there was a period of time, like in the 50s and 60s and 70s, where kids couldn't wait to get out on their own. Kids were talking about getting an apartment at 17, 18, 20 years old. And now that just is not feasible. For one, economically, the cost of housing has increased dramatically. And in addition to that, the opportunities for young folks aren't necessarily there. And we've actually, I think, talked about this in the class before, where maybe they're not making their own opportunities in some cases. And now that our parents are living longer, that is a blessing. Nevertheless, sometimes they, require care. One of the bigger selling insurance options now is long-term care. That was never even anything that my parents, I don't think it was even available to them. If insurance companies even sold that product or created that product. But most recently, I was talking to an insurance guy, and hopefully I won't need anything for at least a long time, or my wife won't need anything for a long time. But that was the one thing he said. Okay, yeah, like if I walk out, some money walks in for the family. But if I get disabled, or then it's going to fall on someone to care for me, unless I take out some additional insurance, which I have not done yet. But so yeah, the fact that our parents are living longer, and grandparents in some cases, that certainly is a blessing. And but it also has changed the dynamics of our development. And as I said, that's a new term relatively. And interestingly enough, not so much with the kids per se, in terms of not getting out, but we used to really have in America, at least, what we would call an extended family. Now it's a nuclear family. So the extended family was aunts, uncles, cousins, and parents, grandparents, if you will. And it was more of a communal and cultivist mentality that families stayed together that way. As I mentioned in my reply to you, that my grandparents, now both deceased many years, on my mom's side, my mom and her sisters, she had 3 sisters, one still living. We were originally from Kentucky, but through different reasons, jobs and things like that, the sisters all and moved to South Florida with their husbands, actually. And my grandparents, when they retired, would come down and spend several months in the winter down here in Florida, because they were retired. They were not people of means. They had a small house on a farm, small farm in Kentucky, just a family farm. Anyway, they would be able to come down in the wintertime. There would be actually some hurt feelings from whichever sisters the grandparents didn't stay with. So it's a new phenomenon, but it's certainly something that's impacting us in real time in this class. So I did want to take a look at development, personality development through the middle adulthood this week, while we have a little bit of time here. We talking about Freud and Erikson, and someone, I forget who posted first this week, called Erikson's psychoanalytical theory. You could say that it's taken some license. Erikson's really a psychosocial, but he was influenced by Freud. So I don't think I replied much to that in the discussion. But Erikson took development much further than Freud did. He took it from a different perspective. As the video explained, Freud looked at it as sexual stages, and Erikson looked at it more globally as social stages. And Erikson, of course, took it on to the entire lifespan. And Freud kind of stopped, very early on. So I think in that regard, Erikson kind of gets my nod for a theorist that I would lean to. There are others. I mean, Levinson's here. There are more than we're going to get into in this class. But we have, Levinson's idea here that adulthood, around 40 to 45, around that area. Maybe it's a little older now. People, and I think this is true. At a certain point, and Laura, you can speak to this. When we're very young, we're always looking forward to what we're going to do. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And then at a certain point, the scale kind of tips to, yeah, we're still thinking about some things we might want to get done, but we also start looking back at things that we did or didn't do, and that can lead to either joy or regret. And Levinson speaks to that more than Erickson does. Erickson alludes to it a little bit, but I remember first learning about this very young in college, my early 20s, and not being able to relate to it as much as I have now at 57, because now I do. And I remember reflecting on this, thinking, oh, I'm looking back now, and that's where I learned about back in a class in 1980 or whatever, that it would happen. And yeah, there's been some, and probably like many people, I think, some joys and some regrets as well. And maybe some friends that you have talked about that, Lori, maybe it resonated with yourself.
Well, I think that my husband and I actually were talking about this last weekend. Would you go back to high school? Would you change your life? Would you do things differently? Because both of us have been divorced and have remarried each other, of course. But, thinking about it, I don't think either one of us would change things, because if you change how things were, so, you have to look at how much do you regret? You may regret some things, but would I change anything? No, because I wouldn't have the kids that I have. I wouldn't have some of the things that I have, and I wouldn't have certainly an appreciation for things that I have now.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a real healthy way to look at it. And I've worked with people in a coaching and counseling situation who are really kind of having a hard time letting some of those things go. But and I can certainly, I think most people would say, it'd be nice if I knew this or if I knew that. But there's been no one in recorded history, or that I've certainly ever talked to or read about, that can say they made every right decision, along the way. So even if you went back in your life and said, gosh, I should have done this a little differently, or I should have went to this college, or I should have taken this job, that's no guarantee you'd be any better off than you would be at where you are right now. As you said, you can't do that. So to dwell on that as an exercise in futility, and that can actually lead to some mental health problems. And as the fella alluded to in the video, some of this is just perspective taking. And say in Erickson's stages, do we come to this? Are we settled that we have lived a good life, or are we going to be depressed and regret that? Again, there's no way to know for sure. So it really depends on the position that you take and what you dwell on.
If you want to dwell on the rearview mirror, you can't really look forward and move on.
Yeah, I heard this recently too. I can't think of. I listen to motivational speakers all the time in the car, and I think it was Max Lucado actually, and I've heard this from others as well. There's a reason that the rear view in your car, there's a reason the rear view mirror is smaller than your windshield. Because a small amount of time looking back and most of the time looking forward. So I think that's very appropriate. So go ahead.
Back enough to realize we don't want to repeat the bad stuff.
Sure.
Look at what you don't want to repeat, but you can't regret it because it's done, it's over, and you move forward.
And that's exactly right. Yeah. If you burn your hand on the stove, then you don't want to put your hand on the hot stove again. Of course you reflect on that. On the other hand, you don't want to sit and cry in front of the stove and say, you got to move on. And then this, again, the PowerPoint speaks of that. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at the PowerPoint. I'm not going to go over every slide, but again, it speaks to this, or alludes to it, I think, that depending on whatever's happened, even if things haven't worked out for you, you can't go back, but you can go forward. No matter what has happened in your life, so important to realize that some of them may weigh you down. But I look around at some of the people who have really made it big in this country. For example, let's say an extreme example, you might have a criminal record. You maybe have spent some time in jail for a crime that you committed. Okay, there are people who have done that, who went in and paid their debt to society, if you will, and have come out and really done very well for themselves. There are people who've been through bankruptcies and everything else. I'll give you some examples. There's a fellow named Don King. You may know who he is. He was very famous back, I guess, in the 70s and 80s. He's still around. He's a boxing promoter and I think a casino. Okay. Pardon me?
By knowing Don King, I suppose I'm showing my age.
Yeah. Well, I used to love boxing when I was younger. I don't care much for it now. But when I was younger, my friends and I, it was a very popular sport that we watched, and he was a big promoter. And he spent time in jail for manslaughter. He came out and he kind of thumbs his nose. His company called Only in America is kind of like, only in America can you do something this bad and come back and make millions of dollars. There's Martha Stewart, who had to go to jail. She got in trouble for something with stocks, I think it was, and she came out and has made more money, coming out afterwards. Any number of people you can think of that have gone through, or people have gone through bankruptcies and come out and made millions of dollars. Colonel Sanders, I can't think of his real name, but I think he didn't really do much with his life until he was basically at the age most people retire, and that's when he started his Kentucky Fried Chicken franchises. So that's, I think, real important that we can learn from our past, as you said, but we don't have to repeat it. So I think it's a real good lesson for us. Now, some of the PowerPoint gets a little almost, if you're not careful, can seem contradictory, because in middle adulthood, like in some cases there is a lot less stress, but there are some things that can happen that can take you spiraling down, and it's mentioned here on this slide here. Death of a child, which unfortunately can happen. Don't wish it on anybody. That has not happened to me, and I hope it never does. But it's happened to people that I love, and that's obviously very, heartbreaking. But the longer you live, the more chance you have of that. Losing a parent. I have a friend who lost a parent recently who's having a hard time with that, or friend, sibling. Changes in our own health can change our outlook, possibly. And the one thing that seems the most contradictory is the financial difficulties. It's typically by the time you kind of get on the other side, on the high side of middle adulthood, you kind of got your station in life. By then you're in a house. You kind of figure out how to work a budget. If you can go to Europe 2 or 3 times a year, then you do. Or if you don't, you realize that you can't do that. You realize that dinner, a night not cooking might be ordering pizza, or it might be going out to a nicer restaurant. So money is relative, and typically, in most cases, people on that higher side of middle age have kind of figured out, again, what their station is in life. Now that perhaps has changed, again, going back to some societal influences. Since 2008, it was a big crash, and there's still really a lot of people who have, it's hard to say not recovered from that, but haven't caught up to where they were, where they would have been. In fact, I think that's true with many people, at least possibly across the country. But for myself and my situation in my geographic area and the professionals that I deal with, I think it's very fair to say that over half, at least, I won't say everybody, but over half are not where they would have been had that not happened. Nevertheless, again, they have realized that, okay, that happened. I'm not where I would have been, but this is where I'm at, and I know that this is what I can do now in terms of where I can send my kids to college and what kind of car I can drive and where we can go on vacation and those kind of things. Um, so, and again, um, I'm going to ask you to pipe in on your reflections on this, Lori, in just a second, but also concerns about, weight, aging, and appearance. I think that there's two sides to that coin as well. I think noticing that our appearance changes, and I'm right in here too, so I'll talk about myself as well as others my age and people that I've counseled and taught. We realize that we start to look older. We never thought we would. We used to, when we were young, we thought, gosh, wrinkles, or I'll never. I used to. Now, me personally, I'm guilty of this. Like, I will never, ever, be a little overweight, or I'll always be in shape. I'll always go to the gym. That's not happening now. So, you think, those things you start realizing. On the other hand, I think people on the upper side of middle age, I think, are less vain, for lack of a better term. And that may apply more to men than women. I'll grant you that. But on the other hand, I think men, probably, in some cases, in my experience, at least talking to men and couples and whatnot, are less concerned with looks of the opposite sex, if you will. So again, so I think that's a double-edged sword, or two sides of a coin. What do you think?
I think our priorities change as we get older. It's not so much, oh my gosh, I have to make sure that I have this makeup on. I have to make sure my hair is done. I have to make sure. I guess I look at it as I've started getting a few gray hairs, but you know what? I've earned those gray hairs. And so that's okay. And I guess I've been fortunate or unfortunate, I don't know, depending how you look at it. I've had that near-death experience in my life. So having had that in my life, I think I have a whole different appreciation than some people. My husband and I have talked about that as well. He can't understand that appreciation for life that I can. So every gray hair I get, every wrinkle I get, wow, it's another year that I get to be here, and God has blessed me with being allowed to be on this earth and still have my kids and my grandkids and my grandma and my parents and everybody. I think it really depends on how you look at it and where your priorities are in life.
Right. Yeah, Lori, I think that resonates with me, because some of the folks that I talk to, again, professionally and in casual conversation, that are my peers, the women especially will, who that I was kind of referring to, will say, I've earned those gray hairs. That's a common phrase, and when they've kind of come to realize, okay, yeah, this is who I am. And, I raised, I got, 3 kids through teenage years, and I got them into college. So yeah, that's fine. This is fine. This is my badge, if you will. This is my badge of courage. The gray hair and the wrinkles. So if you don't like it, tough for you, because this is who I am. So I think that does resonate with a lot of folks. Not everyone. And I think that it's natural to reflect some and think, gosh, I wish I could. I used to be able to do a mile in less than 6 minutes, which is not any threat to the world record, but I don't know if I could run a mile in 20 minutes now, but so it's natural to reflect on some of those things, I think most people do to some extent, but to dwell on it, that's where you kind of get dysfunctional, and you're missing what's happening now. So I think it's a very good point. The other thing that is something that probably we won't appreciate for maybe another couple of decades, in terms of human development. And when Erickson was looking at this, and all these other theorists that do lifelong, even Kolb for that matter, the idea was that men, back in those days especially, and women to a certain extent, they settled into the career at about 25 years old, probably 30 at the latest, so that in midlife, if you will, you were established again, and that's what your identity was there, and you were doing well in your career, hopefully. If not, that was the problem. But for the majority of the people, that was where you were, and that was what you were going to do until you retired. Back then it was 65, and now, and again, if there was a job change, it was something 20 or 25 years ago. If a job change for somebody 40 or 45, something dramatic happened, and could have been something good. It could have been a person working a long time, or maybe getting out of the military or what have you, and then getting that promotion, or but that wasn't very common. Usually if a job change came along for someone, and again, it was especially men, because was who was in the workforce more so then, it was probably something not good. That meant that the company closed, or they lost their business, or they got caught doing something wrong, embezzling money from the bank or whatever have you. So, that looking, where we're at now, that happens all the time. And the projection is now people will not only change jobs, the estimates go from, 6 times to 12 times over their lifetime. They'll actually change careers. And now it's not just men, or not mostly men. Now it's men and women. And what we're doing right now is a part of that. The access to post-secondary education is much more accessible now than it was 20 years ago, even 15 years ago. There was very little opportunity for working adults, or adults with families and responsibilities, to have time for classes, because you'd have to drive to the college, and all these kind of things, and that's assuming you were close to a college. Now wherever you're at in the entire world, you can take classes if you can find a way to get them paid for, and you can read and write, and academically can do that. So that means this. That means that there's going to be more people graduating at a later age who will now want to do something with that degree. So that's going to be something developmentally that we'll also look at. I'm going to ask for your reflections on this. I haven't been off necessarily, but I've been home more in the last couple of weeks because of winter break and whatnot. And the TV's on a little bit. I'm not a huge fan of TV per se, but a lot of people watch quite a bit. And I was watching a rerun of MASH the other day, that old television show MASH. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah.
Okay. So this was the dialogue. It's a comedy show, and there was a guest star on the show, and they were bartering for some things. This guy had things that the people in the MASH unit needed, and everything, and they were trading this, that, and the other. And the fella on the outside said, "I'm going to give you these." I think it was syringes or something like that. And the guy, Colonel Potter, I think is the guy's name, says, "Well, I don't have anything to give you in return." And the soldier said, "Well, just gift wrap a nurse for me." Now, obviously, in those days, it's kind of a joke, and first of it's sexist and all those kind of things, which is not okay. But what resonated with me was, had I not been, if I hadn't been looking at the show or whatever, I just heard that, it would not have. I never would have thought anything more about it at that time. But now we have as many male nurses as female nurses.
True.
So the idea, so yeah, thing in those days, yeah, I go see a pretty nurse. Like that was when I was a kid, that's people talk about, are there pretty nurses when somebody's in the hospital? Is a pretty nurse taking care of you? Again, which has other innuendos which may not be acceptable now, or shouldn't have been acceptable then. That's a conversation for another class maybe. But this idea that those days, like, it was a given. In fact, for a period of time, if a gentleman became a nurse, they would call him male nurse. Like, well, he couldn't be a female nurse. But anyway, so those things have changed. What are your reflections on that?
It's funny. My dad was recently in the hospital, had a back surgery, and as he was waking up and still under some anesthetic, and he had a male nurse came in, and the gentleman told him that, I'm your nurse and you're ready to get up. And my dad just looked at him and said, "You're a funny looking nurse."
Right.
Fortunately, the guy had a good humor, but yeah, it was, but I think that is, in his day, nobody, if you were a female and you were going out into the workforce, I think you were either a nurse or a teacher, basically.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly
So,
right.
or you were told to stay at home. And
Exactly.
your first husband was in on that. You weren't supposed to work. You were supposed to be at home. You took care of the kids, you took care of the house, and that was it. You weren't allowed to work.
Right.
So I think very fortunate now that we do have so many more opportunities, men and women.
Mm-hmm.
And we can cross some of those lines, so to speak. And I think it's just made us stronger all over.
I agree. I think there's, I've read articles that there's data, if you will, to back that up. It's more than just our opinion. Likewise, there was never ever a female doctor when I was a kid growing up. That was unheard of. But now there's as many. My doctor's a lady, a female. I love her to death. There's a lot more female doctors out there now, and again, probably it seems at least that half and half, I guess. My wife's her primary is a man, but as her doctors are females. So that has changed. When I was a kid, it was hard for a woman to get into law school. It just didn't happen. It just was, there wasn't anything that, written that they couldn't, but it was shunned on. And again, like you said, the father, the brother, the husband would say, "You're not going to law school. You got your degree. Go teach. You want a job? Go teach. Go be a teacher." So I think, yeah, these things I think, do make the country stronger, make our society stronger. The other thing that I'll allude to, and I think it's and I'm no economist, and I love social science, but this is a little beyond my pay grade, if you will. But when I was a kid, we basically got by on one income. If the mom worked, or it was maybe part-time, and here and there. But now it almost takes two incomes, depending on where you live. But more and more places now call for that two-income family, to some extent. But having said that, I think I may have mentioned this to you. I've talked about him so many times recently. It's Dave Ramsey, who says, if you approach your finances more proactively than most people do, whether it's the man or the woman, can stay home and clip coupons. Who clips coupons anymore? And plans meals the way that there's something to be said for that as well. And again, that might be something that we look back as social scientists, 30 or 40 years from now, and see where we came from.
Well, again, I think our priorities have changed. We want more, so we have to, have two incomes in
Right.
order to afford the vacations, the two cars, we didn't want all of that, or it wasn't a priority, maybe 50 years ago, that are the priorities now, which is also why now you see a lot of kids who are staying home and not able to go out and afford their own place, and
Mhm.
because they might not also be happy with
Mhm.
the lesser place. They want what mom and dad have right now.
Right.
And our priorities change, and as they change, we change, and we need more money to support that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. And yeah, more things, more expensive things, and I think that is also lent to it. And that kind of goes back to what Ramsey says. Well, you can get by with one car. And again, that's a whole other conversation for another time. But that's his point. It kind of lends itself to what you're saying right now as well. The other, just quickly, and we're going to get out of here pretty soon. A lot of this is about personality development, and our personalities kind of remain stable over our lifetime. In most cases, that's not, you'll find an occasion where somebody either changed or kind of came out of their shell for a certain amount of, or for a certain reason, and it couldn't. Maybe it's just that they were always that person, and just finally got the opportunity to go out and be this extrovert. But the Big Five personality, Big Five factor. This is you should know this coming out of this course, what the Big Five are, right here: extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness to experience. There's many years there was this sort of drive in social sciences that this 5-factor model what would determine your happiness and success in your career and in life. I never ascribed to it to the extent that if experts did, and maybe they know a lot more than me. That's why they're the experts. There's been a little bit of pushback in the past, only about maybe 5 years, if that, on this. I think it's good to know this. One of the big pushbacks has been that you don't necessarily need to be an extrovert to be successful and happy. Forget happy, but just to be successful, say in your career. The reason is, and there is research to back this up, the person who is out there and who is sort of the, not being obnoxious, the loudest, who speaks the most, is perceived as a leader and someone who comes top of mind when a project is being assigned or a promotion is being given. But now the pushback is, the introverts, just because a person is not an introvert because they're shy or they're bashful or they don't have social skills, there's a big misunderstanding about that as well. The key here is extroverts kind of draw their energy from people around them, where introverts draw their energy from within. We both, extroverts and introverts both need people. They just draw their energy in a different kind of a way. Introverts would tend to more reflect on what people have said and what they do and how they act and what they need or what they perceive that the person needs. Where extroverts kind of jump ahead and take action. Introverts, though, they do take action, just like extroverts do take a back seat sometimes. The difference here, and I think what the pushback has been, is that introverts, if they're wise or if they make good choices, which typically they do, the successful ones, they take action at the key time, not necessarily all the time, but at the key time. They pipe in and say, listen, I think this might be a good idea, or I have an idea how we can, increase sales or, reduce turnover, whatever the case may be. So I think this is going to go through in the next decade or so. There's going to be maybe someone might come up with another theory here. It kind of looks like we're on the early stages of that. Nevertheless, it's something that you really should kind of commit to memory and know a lot about. Have you heard of this before? The Big Five? Okay. Yeah, it's in every psychological development book or human development book. And I bring it up because every time I teach it somewhere, here it is again and again. Like, I like it and I see its value, but I don't, I don't, pound the drum on it quite as much as others. In addition to which, this is a different personality development sort of lane, if you will. I spent a lot of time on personality types, and this doesn't really lend itself to a personality type in as much as like the Myers-Briggs does. So, and that's where I spend a good deal of my time. So, anyway, pay attention to that and take some notes, maybe put on a 3 or 5 card and try to commit it to memory a little bit, because going through a course like this, it is something that you should know. All right, well, I'm going to get out of here. Unless you have any other questions, is there anything you want to add? All right.
No, I'm good.
Well, I'm happy to see you. I trust that you had a great Christmas. I'm sure you did with all the family that you had there. We had a great time here, and do stay warm. And I'll say a quick prayer for us. It's okay. Father in heaven, just thank you so much for Lori and her family, her extended family. I thank you for her approach and her attitude, and seeing the opportunities that you lay before her feet to serve and have joy. according to your will. I pray that you'll keep them safe in the storms and the winter that they're having, and bless her efforts, and bless her and her husband and their family. Be with all the students and their families as we move forward in this course, the last week and a half that we have together, Lord. Pray for my family as well, that you'll bless us and keep us safe. All these things we pray in the precious name of Jesus. Amen. All righty. I'll see you in the course room.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.